Hey y'all, welcome to the Team LocoFit Roundtable, hosted by me, Laurin and Karina, owner of Team LocoFit. Each week, I am joined by one of our coaches to dive headfirst into the nutrition, training, mindset, and coaching strategies we use with our clients. If you loved the show, please subscribe, leave us a review, tell a friend, you know the drill. And for more information about coaching, the programs we offer, and additional content, visit teamlocofit.com.
All right, and we are back once again with Coach Karina. Hey guys. And I'm really excited for this podcast because this is something that comes up so much. It's come up so much recently for both of us with clients. It kind of comes in waves and cycles, but I would say that generally the beginning of the year is a very common time for this kind of question to come up. A lot of people are either starting a diet or they're starting a competition prep. And the question, comment, concern, whatever we're going to call it, is why you're not losing weight when you start a diet. And this seems very frustrating to a lot of people, right? They've put in, particularly our clients, they've put in time in an off-season period where they are not in a calorie deficit. They've built their calories up. They're maintaining really well. Like, life is good. They're eating a lot of carbs. Like, everything's just really steady. And you've taken this time to put yourself in a position to have the best diet possible. So when you start, you imagine that everything's going to be going like this. Like, every week, scale drop, scale drop, scale drop. Yeah. Should be really linear, should be really easy. Especially people think, the beginning is really easy because I'm at a higher body fat, so it should be easier for me to drop weight. Mm-hmm. And there's several reasons why this is often not the case. And so anybody who's listening, who's ever started a diet and you think that you're just going to lose like 5 or 10 pounds right away the first few weeks, generally speaking, it doesn't happen. There are some people who this does happen with, but I want people to realize that they are not alone when they are not just dropping tons of body fat right from the start. And there's a few reasons for this. First and foremost, probably the most important reason is that there are people who have adaptive metabolisms. And when we say adaptive metabolism, it means kind of exactly that. Your metabolism adapts pretty easily to anything that you're doing. And this is a really cool thing when you're in an off-season period or a non-dieting period, because you can generally eat a lot of food and maintain your weight. What's not cool about this is that when you go to diet, your body adapts really quickly to that calorie deficit as well.
If you're adaptive in one direction, it's very likely that you'll be adaptive in the other direction. It's just kind of how your body will be very consistent in responding to dietary changes.
And that's me, like, through and through. Like, I can eat a good amount and maintain my weight, roughly. But for me to lose body fat requires me to be in a pretty harsh deficit for me to make continuous changes.
Same, yeah.
Not every week, there's some weeks where you don't have to make any changes. But generally speaking, and we could do, I guess, a whole different podcast on this, but the reason to eat more food when you're not dieting is not just so you can diet on more food. That's like, that myth needs to be ended. I really wish that could just go away because it's generally not true. There's a lot of other positives to eating more food. Not just so that you could diet on more calories, but anyways, understanding that a lot of people, and this is where it's frustrating because the person's like, oh my gosh, I've worked my food up, so much, or
I've done everything
right. Why am I not losing weight right now?
Yeah.
And it's annoying because, maybe you've taken off dieting for the past 6 months, the past year, you're doing all these things, you're priming your body and you're so excited to start this. And whether it's a fat loss goal or whether it's a wedding or a photo shoot, or if it is a competition, you're like, okay, I'm ready to get this going. Why is it not happening? And oftentimes it's the people who have the adaptive metabolisms that really struggle here. And this is something that I coined the term, like, within, like, clients, and like, kind of, I like to compartmentalize things in this, and it's not like a great term, but I call it the threshold effect. And there are thresholds that we seem to have to hit in order to really start seeing a lot of drops. So when we start somebody on a diet, we're not just going to be like, hey, let's cut it all the way down and you better start responding. No. We're going to start, somewhat aggressively to, like, kickstart a deficit, but we're going to be mindful that we're not going to go from, like, this huge intake to, like, nothing. We want to work our way down.
And why do we want to do that?
because you want to get the most out of the least changes possible, right? You want to get the most out of the highest calories possible, the least amount of cardio possible.
Yeah, that's what I constantly tell my clients when we are making those initial changes. The goal is to always lose body fat on as many calories as we can and as little cardio as we can, because people are like, I just want to make all these changes right away. Well, like, no, the goal with, especially if you're a competitor, is to maintain as much muscle mass as you possibly can. You don't want to lose that. Yeah. And so when you make those changes much faster than you need to, you start to sacrifice muscle mass, which is why the goal should be to lose on as many calories as you can and as little cardio as you can. Oftentimes you find that, sometimes like we said, this is happening a lot right now, you have to get to that point. But you shouldn't always jump there out of the gate.
No, this is where nuance of coaching comes in, right? If you've worked with somebody before, you kind of have the benefit of knowing if they have this kind of a threshold, right? If every time that you work with somebody for a competition prep or a diet cycle, and you get around a certain amount of food, and like that's really when a lot of the changes start happening. For that person, I might go there a little bit faster if I've had a lot of experience with them, but not even always. I'm not just because hey, if we can get a little bit out of this other intake, let's do it. And that's generally what we do the first few weeks. Okay, let's get a lot out of this, and then if somebody's not really responding, that's when it's like, okay, well, it's time to get more aggressive and it's time to work down to this threshold. And then sometimes what's really, really cool about this is that, the person was not really making a lot of adjustments, or they weren't really making any changes with all the adjustments. And then we hit a certain threshold and then they just keep dropping. And again, not always, but a lot of times there are people who fit this criteria, and that's where just being really observant as a coach is important. And I would say that almost everybody, like whatever you want to call it, like this like magical zone or this threshold effect, like whatever you want to call it, it really is something that I see a lot. And it's often lower than we would like, right? Like it's not, and that's what is frustrating, because especially if you are somebody who's a little bit more adaptive, and even if you're not adaptive, you're still going to run into this. You're not just going to be able to just drop on so many calories. For the majority of our clients, we're working with women who are just going to be obviously smaller in general and generally have a little bit less muscle mass. Obviously, like if somebody is, so say we have a client who's really, really tall and really muscular, and they're eating a ton of food in the off season, they're probably gonna be able to diet on more food, right? Like it just makes sense.
Yeah.
And then somebody else who's maybe smaller or more petite or has less muscle, or just all these different things.
You and I are like the perfect.
Yeah, exactly. Totally different situation. Mm-hmm. And you can't compare to watching what other people are doing in that scenario.
I think it's also super important.
That goes to the body type stuff that you wanted to touch on.
Yeah. So, like I said, for example, our body types are very different. Someone who is very tall, we all know that Laurin is much taller than me, is going to be able to maintain a certain body composition and diet on more calories than someone who is generally smaller. Smaller people just don't need as much food to maintain all of their bodily functions. Also, like endomorphic, ectomorphic body types are very different. Individuals who have a much easier time building and maintaining muscle will have a much harder time losing body fat. On the contrary, as I almost punched this microphone
all right,
out of the way, individuals who have a much harder time gaining weight, putting on muscle, will have a much easier time dropping body fat as well. So that's something to expect. If you're someone who you have a pretty quote unquote easy time adding muscle, just know that you're going to have a harder time losing body fat. You're going to have to get more aggressive. And
you'll be able to maintain that muscle easier.
The good news is, with you being aggressive, you won't just lose all your gains when you're eating very little.
And then vice versa. If somebody is, it's harder for them to put on muscle and, they're going to lose it quicker. So that's going to be a person who needs, probably more refeeds or maybe a little bit less cardio. The clients who build muscle really easily, and it really sticks and everything sticks, those clients typically I find do better with higher cardio, versus a client who's naturally, more on the, let's say like ectomorphic or just kind of like petite side. They're just gonna literally be so stringy and they're going to lose all of the gains they've made. Mm-hmm. So that's where it's really important to tailor the coaching method, of course. And that's where it's important to see, okay, how is somebody responding on a week-to-week basis, and this is where, working with clients for long periods of time is really useful, because it's really hard when you're first starting with somebody to know how their body's going to respond. But if you're going on 2 or 3 years working with them, like, you're going to have a much broader, encyclopedia of knowledge about the client and like what works for them. And it still could change. One thing that's important to recognize is that every time that you engage in a new cycle of something, whether it's a diet cycle or you're trying to lose body fat, whether it's a building cycle, you're trying to gain muscle, or you're trying to improve your performance, whatever it might be, those, just because something worked before doesn't mean that it's going to work again. Now it could, and it's going to give us some general direction, but it still might have some variation. So understanding that, it is tough to get things started, generally speaking. And this is so common. And like we said, a lot of it's going to be heavily influenced by your body type, by your genetics, and by your past dieting history. We've talked extensively about dieting history, and that is something that is really, really important to talk about. And it's not something that we can ignore. Now, it doesn't mean it's a death sentence for your fat loss phase or anything like that. You can still make progress, but it is going to influence someone. And the biggest thing about dieting history that we have to take into consideration is that not only is it, hey, I was dieting off and on and cyclically dieting and yo-yo dieting for all these years, and then we've been working together for a short amount of time. Isn't it corrected yet? That's
it takes a long time to undo all of those things. And to touch on that as well, I just made an Instagram post about this 2 days ago, that metabolism is very dynamic. There are a lot of other variables that come into play in terms of how your body is going to respond to how well you can lose body fat. Hormones are a big one. Dieting is a big one. Stressors, lifestyle, and all of those things. And so I think a lot of people go in with the expectation of, I am a perfect mathematical equation. If I started on this many calories and if I slash this many, I should be losing weight. No problem, when that's not completely in touch with reality, and that, you are not a perfect mathematical equation. Just because you're in a deficit on paper, there are a few other things that might inhibit, lipolysis and fat oxidation for you to actually lose what we want to lose. And it's not just calories in versus calories out.
If you haven't listened to that podcast, you definitely should. And I think that you said it perfectly. A lot of people, especially people who get into this world, are very, numbers-based people, mm-hmm. right? So they want to see something all right, well, X plus Y equals this.
Very black and white thinking.
Yeah, which we always want to try to avoid as much as possible. And, in some instances it's going to happen, of course. But
and that's when it's awesome.
Yeah.
But it's not always that way.
It can be useful, but it can also be to our detriment. And, using equations and using math and using these evidence-based principles, yes, we're all about it.
Absolutely.
But there is a lot more that needs to be taken in consideration and finessed in order for the diet to be appropriate and in order for you to actually see changes. The other thing too, which is a smaller part, but which is often something that is there, is that, a lot of people who have been in an off-season period, their insulin sensitivity might be off. And not everybody, right? There's a lot of people who can tolerate eating a lot of food and don't really have any issues. And then there are some people who kind of tend to lose a little bit of that sensitivity, and then it's actually, those first few weeks of you being in a deficit, it's just kind of regulating them. So this is not something that, it, again, is, oh my gosh, you're never going to make progress with this. It's just, again, something to be aware of. And if you do test, we just like to have people, okay, hey, if we think that you're running into this issue, or just in general, let's just test your glucose at different times of the day. When you wake up, and then obviously postprandial, and then we can just get an idea of what's going on. And it might be no issue. It's kind of like how we talked about last time on the other podcast about just checking in, with stuff. Sometimes you'll just track on a day just to just check in, where I'm at. Yeah. I'll weigh every once in a while myself, okay, just checking in. This is a good thing to check in.
A lot of my intuitive eating people, I have them check blood glucose pretty regularly, mm-hmm. because that's a very important metabolic marker to kind of keep in check with. Mm-hmm. If you are someone who is kind of losing touch with how many calories or carbs and sugars that you're eating. Not to say that carbs are the devil or sugar is the devil,
No.
but we can get a little bit carried away. And if we do that for too long, we could run into insulin insensitivity issues.
Yeah, and oftentimes what I think that we're seeing in the beginning of a diet is that, right?
Yeah.
We're seeing, okay, somebody's been eating high calorie for a while, particularly high carbohydrates, which is totally fine, and that's suited for their goals, but then that could create a little bit more of a stagnant initial weight loss efforts. And the thing too is just to be realistic. You know, if you are somebody who has a moderate goal, you know, you're like, listen, my end goal is to be about 10 pounds lighter, like 10 pounds less body fat over the course of a year or two, right? Like that's like your end goal. I just want to be a different shape, size, composition, etc. You know, that's very different than if you need to lose a lot more weight, right? So if you, or even if you're just a larger person. So if you're looking at like, let's say like a male who's 300 pounds, they're going to lose weight a lot faster in the beginning because they have more weight to lose. If you're a 140 pound female who wants to get down to 130 as like your end goal in 2 years, you're not going to lose 5 pounds the first week.
Yeah.
So you have to also take it into that kind of a scale, right? Like what are you comparing these initial fat loss efforts to? You know, and actually if you do lose too quickly, again, I don't like to get too into the numbers. I think a lot of people focus so much on numbers. Like I'm going to be at this percent of a drop this week with my calories and my body percentage is going to drop. Okay. Like I understand why, you know, that can be useful for some people, but I think it gets so in the weeds for others, and it can be more detrimental because they're like, well, I was supposed to lose 1% of my body weight this week and why didn't I do it?
It's like, okay, there's a goal and I failed already, and now that's like the morale just like, no, like we'll see. Obviously I like to have a rate of loss goal.
Yeah.
Same thing with rate of gain when we're going the other way, just to make sure we're not going crazy. But doesn't mean that it's over if you have 1 week where you don't lose anything. You know?
And you have to look at it over the large scale too.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just 1 week or 1 day. It's obviously weeks build upon each other. And okay, how did this month go and all that stuff. So I think that it's just really important to look at it in not such a direct way. Like, oh, I just started my fat loss phase and I should just be dropping all this body fat like super, super easily. And I would say that for most people, they're going to see a little bit of a drop when they first start. They're going to, I don't feel as full. Like I feel, everything's regulated right now. Like I feel pretty good. I feel a little bit lighter. Like, I'm a little bit hungry, but I'm okay. And then the real changes start to happen down the line as we've been doing this for a long time. And it goes back to that consistency. Our bodies love consistency no matter what we're doing. And when you are trying to be in a deficit and trying to do something that's like, all right, we're trying to lose body fat and maintain muscle, you have to be really consistent for a long period of time in order to see that. It's not going to be an accident.
There's also a cumulative effect with consistency. Like for some people, so I'll make a change. They won't lose any weight that first week, but I'll still hold steady. And then that drop comes because it's almost like a 2-week accumulation of that deficit. And then it takes a little while, but then it finally pays off.
For sure. And that's where being patient is really important and not expecting, you want to look at more than just, okay, how is the scale moving? Now, I always try to frame this in a way because I think a lot of times people, as always, can take messages too far in the extreme and they're like, it doesn't really matter what you weigh, you don't even need to look at it. And it's like, well, we have to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh my God, this is not a good time to have, no, this is not a good time to have this lack of brain firing.
Accountability.
Nope.
I'm trying.
I know. Jesus. Like something to look like a measurement. So we can see changes. Oh my gosh, this is so embarrassing.
An absolute value to make.
Second meltdown in the podcast. Nice. But this one's self-inflicted. So anyways, using the scale, if you're trying to get on stage, you can't be the same weight when you started to when you get on stage, right? Unless you were obviously already stage trained. So to say something like the scale doesn't matter for some people is wrong. In order to lose body fat, we're going to be seeing the scale drop, right? Unless you're one of these people who is gaining muscle while you're losing body fat, which happens to about 0.01% of people, right? It's not normal. Some people do it, so they wouldn't really see a big scale change, but hate to break it to you. Yeah, you're probably not that person, which is totally fine. Yeah. So, we can't just throw the scale away, right? Like, it is important to look at for these measurements. But we also have to look at the other measurements, and that's why we ask a lot of questions on our check-ins, so we can see all these other things, like how is somebody doing, like their hunger, their training, their sleep, their performance, their mentality, how they feel, what are their other measurements that they're, are those things changing? Because oftentimes what I find, and I'm sure you see the same thing, is that sometimes other things will change first and then weight will change. And then sometimes weight changes, but the person doesn't even look any better, and then it takes a few weeks for that to catch up.
Yeah.
So it's really weird how it happens both ways. So we have to use the scale in a very realistic, quantitative way. That was the word I was looking for. It's a quantitative measurement. Wow. Finally, here we go. 3 minutes later. It's so hard to think about what I am trying to say as I'm already speaking. Anyways.
Still recovering.
I'm literally reeling over here. Just kidding. But I think it's important to have those qualitative measurements, but also not be too fixated. So it's this really weird dichotomy of okay, we have to use them.
Yeah.
But we also have to be realistic about them.
Yeah. Our check-ins are 50% qualitative questions, 50% quantitative, tracking your data. And we just use both of those to kind of see, okay, what does the big picture look like? Because I don't think it's specifically for a fat loss goal that has a strict timeline. It's not smart to be on either and are just constantly looking at, just quantitative or just qualitative. There has to be, you are a multivariate equation, and there are many things that come into play when it comes to the progress of your fat loss.
For sure, and I think that this is often a hard message to hear because, like we said, we understand you've done all of this work in a non-dieting scenario, and you're really excited for everything to go well.
But it happens all the time. So if you're someone who
feels
more
common than not, honestly.
Yeah. And my clients will say this all the time, what's wrong with me? What did I do?
Nothing.
Literally, this happens to a lot of people. There's nothing wrong with you. Sometimes physiology is this way, and all we can do is continue to see how you respond each week. Try every solution possible and keep going until we get a response.
Yeah, and that is often the answer people don't want to hear. But it is true. And, surely if you did this great off-season period and you had everything in line and you started really, really aggressively, you would probably see a bigger drop. And oftentimes people are coming from that background. They're coming from the background to where when they start their plan, it's super aggressive right off the get-go. And not to say that we don't do aggressive changes, because I would say that, oftentimes we do. But I'm talking about hella aggressive, going from no cardio to an hour every day. That's a little much, right? Maybe at the end of your prep, that's where you're at, right? Yeah. But that's not going to be what we're doing right away. So I think that it's important to say, okay, even if I did drop really fast before, well, what was I doing that was very different? And if I was on this hyper restrictive meal plan that was 1,000 calories and doing all this cardio, well, that's a very different situation.
I've been there.
And yeah, you might lose 5 pounds the first week, but that's not all body fat, we promise.
Oh my god, 1 week in my very first traumatic, I lost 11 pounds in 1 week.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I will never forget that week. Obviously, pretty much died by the end of that prep, but
you're eating lettuce and coconut.
Yeah, that's really it.
So sad.
And then don't be tempted, because it was one of the worst things to happen to my body for a while.
Yeah, because afterwards,
it was
holy hell, that was
3 years of repercussions afterwards between hormones and relationship with food and things like that. So don't be tempted.
Yeah, don't try to lose 11 pounds in 1 week like baby Karina did.
Oh my god.
Oh, I feel so bad.
I just want to go back and hug her.
And be no,
it's gonna be okay.
It's fine. You're gonna be okay. You're gonna eat like a normal person.
It doesn't have to be like this.
But yeah, guys, if you're listening to this and this has been you in the beginning of your prep or the beginning of your fat loss phase, or maybe you haven't even started yet, but you're gearing up to, this is likely going to happen. And it's totally okay. It's totally normal. Listen to us. We work with lots of people, and this is very, very common. And there's nothing broken or wrong about you. Doesn't mean that you didn't eat enough in the off season. It doesn't mean that your hormones are out of whack. It doesn't mean that you're, not responding. It just means, all right, this is not enough for your body quite yet. And oftentimes, like I said, it's about finding that threshold that, and then you really start to make progress from there. So, and like you said, the perfect word was like all compounds. All of these changes compound over time, which is why several months into a diet, typically it's like you're just kind of in that groove.
Yeah.
You just kind of feel good. Like things are just easy, they're rolling, like, you know, you're just kind of dropping every week, and that really just takes time. So sorry guys, hate to be the bearer of bad news as usual. That's just kind of our jam. But we always want to be honest and realistic with people. I'm never going to lie to somebody and be like, yep, you're going to lose all this weight in the first week, or yep, this is going to be really easy, 6 weeks to get shredded. Like, no, fuck out of here.
No.
If I ever say that, just be like, oh, somebody took Lauren's phone, or she's totally lost her mind. But yeah, or like 60 weeks get shredded. Actually, that's a long time. But
60.
Yeah, that's over a year.
That's a long time.
Okay, yeah, so not 6, but you also don't need to do 60. So. In any case, if you guys have any other questions for us, or you want to check out the other podcasts, or read any of the articles that we've written, or apply for coaching, you can go to teamlocofit.com. And don't forget that in the show notes, there's also the anonymous section where you can leave a question or a scenario, whether it's something for yourself or just kind of a hypothetical situation that you want to ask about. Leave that there, and we will start to get to those in other podcasts too. So hope you guys have an awesome week, and we will talk to you next time.
Bye.